And now?
Yes, that's great. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, thanks, Tamzin. I'm Caitríona. And as Tamzin mentioned, I'm going to talk you through how the campaign came about in Ireland, so the Anti-Cycles campaign. And then I'll pass you over to Robbie, who'll delve into the findings from the focus group a bit more. So if there were 10 bikes outside a secondary school, one of them would belong to a teenage girl. So from my own anecdotal experience, this is more like 1 in 30 or 1 in 40. So why don't teenage girls cycle, or why do so few teenage girls cycle? So this is a question I asked myself when I was working as a Green Schools travel officer in Dublin. So as part of my role, I had to carry out travel habit surveys in secondary schools. And when I went into the classrooms, I asked teenage girls to raise their hand if they cycled to school. So not only did very few or zero girls and no girls raise their hand, but there was also this kind of nervous laughter happening. So they were looking around the classroom and kind of sniggering, like boys and girls. And when I asked the same question to teenage boys, this just didn't happen. So I realized there was something else going on there. And instead of speculating as to, why there was this kind of atmosphere, I decided to ask the teenage girls themselves. So I worked with a secondary school in Dublin that had about 80 bikes outside it on your average day. And 2 of those bikes belonged to teenage girls. So I carried out the focus group, and the biggest barriers facing these girls when it comes to cycling are, so the first barrier is, the biggest barrier that the girls felt was this: it's not cool for teenage girls to cycle, or it's less uncool for teenage boys. And this is linked to this stigma towards women cycling. So society says no. So this was quite a strong theme that came through. We can't cycle. And then the second biggest barrier was this intimidating behavior or unwanted attention from teenage boys and men. So this involves men shouting at girls who are cycling on their own and shouting at them from cars. Teenage boys cycling along a road, or groups of boys walking along a road, and they're shouting at a teenage girl and she's on her own on a bike. And the girls told me they'd shout things like, "Stay with your helmet," "nice ass," "dyke on a bike." And these are the things that the girls felt comfortable sharing with me. Another focus group that we carried out, there was a girl who cycled every day, or most days. Alana was her name. So Alana said, "I've had lots of horrible experiences, and sometimes I just don't want to get yelled at, so I take the bus." And this comment really stuck in my mind. So I spoke to a health psychologist in Dublin. She works at Trinity College in Dublin. And she highlighted the significance of this self-protective behavior that Alana was exhibiting. So say, for instance, if Alana was to wake up one day and go, "Okay, I'm going to be brave. I'm going to get on my bike, even though I know something might happen, I might get shouted at, but I'm just going to do it anyway." So Alana's cycling to school and a group of guys shout something at her. She's even less likely to get back on her bike the next day. And she's also likely to blame herself for what happened because she knew it was a possibility. So from speaking to the health psychologist, we realized that there were 2 separate conversations that needed to happen to address these barriers. So we had to address this uncool stigma facing teenage girls. And that was a conversation with teenage girls. And we also had to have a conversation with teenage boys and men to address this intimidating behavior or street harassment. So because Green Schools is a small environmental charity, what we could do and what we had the resources to do was to develop a campaign that speaks directly to teenage girls, so that we could normalize the image of a girl on a bike. We wanted to empower the girls to share their experiences of cycling or not cycling, so that they could empower each other to get back on their bikes. So what we did do was we produced some portraits, and this is Leo. So Leo was 13 when this photograph was taken, and she cycles to school because it's the quickest way for her to get there, and it gives her independence. This is Maeve, and Maeve cycled to university, and she cycled to her job in Dublin City. So for her, it was the easiest way. Instead of waiting on a bus, she could just get on her bike. And this is Kiki. And Kiki cycled to school most days. But a year after this photograph was taken, we launched the campaign in Dublin in September in 2019. And Kiki's mom told us that she wasn't cycling anymore because a group of guys were laughing at her and shouting at her when she was coming in and out of the school gate. So hopefully Kiki will get back on her bike. And this is Emily. So Emily cycles to work in Dublin city centre. And for her, it's the most sustainable way to get around. So we had these portraits to launch the campaign, and we also developed a video with a creative agency in Dublin. So because there were two separate conversations that we needed to have to address the barriers facing teenage girls, this video, we wanted to speak directly to teenage girls. So we couldn't get into the street harassment a huge amount because we felt that was condoning the behavior and the street harassment, because essentially we were saying, oh, just do, that's fine, you're getting yelled at, but just get back on your bike. So for this video, we focused on normalizing the image of a girl on a bike, because this is the conversation we're having with teenage girls. And a separate conversation needs to happen with teenage boys to address the street harassment. And we do nod to it in this video. So if you bear with me, I'm just going to play it for you guys now. Look awful, but like you just feel good about yourself. Okay, so just go back to the presentation. So if you have any comments or questions about the video, please hold on to them, because Robbie and myself would love to chat about it in the Q&A session at the end. So with the photographs and the video and the campaign that we developed with teenage girls, we launched it in Dublin in September in 2019. So we had an exhibition of the portraits that are hanging here, and girls that were involved in the campaign. So they helped us develop the campaign, or they were involved behind the scenes, like Aisling here on the right. She went to a screening of the video when we were in the editing stage, and she helped us kind of give feedback and make sure that we were on the right track with the video. And then some of the teenage girls here were in the video itself. So it was great to see all the girls kind of mixing who were involved in the campaign. And we invited we didn't prevent anyone from coming to the campaign, but we really reached out to teenage girls within our school's network to make sure that they dominated the audience, really. So after the exhibition, we had a panel discussion, and we 2 teenage girls on the left here who took part in it. And then in the pink beside me, there was Catherine Darker, who's a health psychologist at Trinity College in Dublin. And then we Tara Stewart, who is a radio DJ back in Dublin. So what was great about this event was because teenage girls kind of dominated the audience in terms of numbers, when we came to the Q&A session, they dominated the questions as well, which was exactly what we wanted. We wanted them to feel comfortable to ask whatever question or share their experiences if they wanted to. And what was cool was some of the girls were asking questions in the audience, and some of the girls on the other side of the audience would answer. So it was a nice conversation back and forth. And that's really what we wanted to do. Like, we wanted to pass them the mic and to give them the floor to talk about their experiences of cycling. And another kind of outcome that was really positive from the launch of the campaign was that we kind of kickstarted a national conversation about these barriers that are facing teenage girls. So, you know, this uncool stigma of a girl on a bike, or the image of a girl on a bike, and then the street harassment that's happening as well. So we were on national news in Ireland, the 6 o'clock and 9 o'clock news on TV, national radio coverage as well, and printed press and online. So the conversations are still happening, which is great. And here in Scotland, Sustrans are currently carrying out research to find out, like, what are the barriers facing teenage girls in Scotland when it comes to cycling. So hopefully there'll be a similar campaign launched here in the future. And on that note, I'm just going to pass you over to Robbie, and he's going to delve a bit more into the research findings from the focus groups and give you guys an update into the campaign and how it's going so far. So thanks.
Well, I go ahead there, Tamzin.
Yes, you're all good. Everyone can see you.
Okay, great. I'll just share the screen. Just bear with me now.
We're just having a little trouble seeing your screen, Robbie. Oh, no, it's come up now.
It's just coming up as the it's coming up that way it came up before, isn't it?
Yeah.
Does that look okay now?
That's perfect. That's great. Thank you.
Okay, great. So just set a timer. Brilliant. Yes, so first of all, thanks very much for having me at this presentation, and it's great to have an audience that's really interested in the subject, which is obviously so important, and is such a market, gender inequality in Ireland and in Scotland and the UK. So really excited to talk about it. So today I'm just going to pick up where Caitríona left off and talk a bit about the research that I've been doing and some of my Green Schools colleagues have been doing, building on the original research that Caitríona completed in Dublin. And yeah, the aim of this research at the moment is to explore the cycling gender gap in Irish secondary schools. So just a bit of an overview of what I'll talk about. Probably be talking for about 10 to 15 minutes. First, I'll talk a little bit about the methodology. Next, some of the influences on the work and on the provisional findings, which are completely provisional. So if it looks like I'm talking about something that I don't fully understand yet, that's because that's where I'm at. And the kind of fundamental provisional patterns, I'll be talking about them a bit as well. And then I'll finish then with talking a little bit about the Anti-Cyclist Ambassador campaign, and with the conclusion that at the moment, it appears that cycling is socially constructed and socially regulated as a boys' thing in Ireland, and probably also in the UK. judging on what's been feedback to Green Schools Ireland at the moment. So my Zoom image seems to be blocking my slide there, Tamzin.
I think you're looking fine from my end.
Okay. Sorry. Basically, the window that I'm seeing into is in the middle of my slide, and I can't seem to move it. Bit of a strange one.
Oh, can you carry on or
Yeah. Look, I'll try my
you?
best. I might miss a few words. Anyway.
Okay.
So the methodology was what I used was grounded theory. So some of you might have heard of grounded theory. You might have heard as well of thematic analysis. So it's a means of kind of it's a methodology for qualitative research that I've used in the past as well. And the fundamental idea behind grounded theory is that you're generating theory from the analysis and collection of data. In this case, it was focus group participants talking to focus group participants and focus group discussions. So data gathered from focus groups. And then you make your own kind of theoretical interpretation of patterns in the data. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the patterns and a little bit about how I coded them myself so far. And so far, there's been 15 semi-structured interviews, 14 of which have been with teenage girls, and then one of which have been with teenage boys. It's been quite difficult to get boys involved, and obviously with the coronavirus pandemic, it's been hard organizing online focus groups. But coming to the end now, probably about 2 more focus groups left, and then it'll be completing the analysis and publishing a report, which hopefully some of you will read in the future. So any kind of qualitative research comes from a particular perspective, and yeah, it should be like any grounded theory, it should be guided by the data you analyze, but obviously there's theoretical influences, and some of the ones I've been reading a lot around gender theory. These are some of the ones that I've come across that I think fit quite well with the patterns that are coming up and provide an interpretive frame for interpreting patterns as well. So so one of which is from Raymond Connell. So some of you, all of us hear about masculinity and toxic masculinity. They're kind of talked about as kind of common sense and folk concepts a lot of the time. Raymond Connell came up with a theory of hegemonic masculinity, which some of you may have heard of as well, which basically, in my interpretation at least, means a dominant form of masculinity that is tied with particular legitimating and maintaining particular relations, gender relations that involve the domination of men and the subordination of women, essentially. And potentially also, maybe in this case, teenage boys over teenage girls. And it does talk about the binary of men and women, so it doesn't necessarily talk about the otherwise gendered as well included. But that's what we're focusing on today with this particular exploration of masculinity and femininity. So according to Connell, then, hegemonic masculinity can be defined as a configuration of gender practice that constitutes the currently accepted answer to the problem of the legitimacy of patriarchy, which guarantees or is taken to guarantee the dominant position of men and the subordination of women. So then as well, I have some influence as well from Shippers, who argues a concept of femininity. So when talking about masculinity, it's important obviously to consider what are as it kind of constitutes part of a binary, what are the other gender practices that are discussed or that are kind of enacted in everyday life that we all probably know in terms of common sense, but aren't always able to talk about really. So Shippers argues that you can also consider a hegemonic form of femininity. So of course, there's many different ways of being feminine, but there are more dominant ways than others. So Shippers argues that hegemonic femininity consists of the characteristics defined as womanly that legitimate a hierarchical and complementary relationship to hegemonic masculinity, and that by doing so guarantee the dominant position of men and the subordination of women. One other influence then worth mentioning is Judith Butler, one of the major proponents of queer theory, in that gender is a politically enforced performativity. So a big part of this would be the idea that gender is not something that's essential or part of our nature, just like masculinity and femininity wouldn't be either, but is actually a politically enforced or highly socially regulated and policed performance. So that's, I think a lot of this provides a nice interpretive framework for what I'll talk about, which is ongoing and is incomplete, and which will hopefully just give us pause for thought more than anything. So some of the provisional themes so far. So I literally can't see the middle of my slide. Sorry. Oh, here we go. Okay. Some of the provisional themes so far. they all really relate to cycling being socially constructed and regulated as a boys thing. And there's two major aspects so far. One is incompatible femininity. And when I refer to femininity here, I refer to a dominant form of femininity. There's multiple femininities, it's not just one. But in this particular context in Ireland, there appears to be a dominant form that involves particular social practices, and namely the practice of modesty, the practice of care to oneself, to others, and to property, the practice of a feminine form of beauty that's context specific, and then the practice of physical restraint, but also maybe restraint in terms of the use of force or power. Next then is cycling as a masculine performance. So incompatible femininity really refers to how cycling as a practice in Ireland at the moment is incompatible with this dominant form of contextually specific femininity. But it actually, in contrast then, it actually is seen as an epitome or a way to practice in the most expansive way possible a particular form of dominant or hegemonic, you could argue, masculinity, which involves a practice of bravado, which you can see in contrast to modesty, indifference, which you can contrast with care, exertion, which you can physical exertion, but also in terms of risk taking, and also in terms of the use of force and potentially authority, which you can contrast with restraint. And then lastly, solidarity, a masculine sort of solidarity, in that cycling is very seldomly practiced as an individual, but actually a lot of the time it can be practiced, at least in a dominant form, as a group, usually a male group. And if not male group, a group that is kind of structured by masculine practices, which could involve other people as well. So just some illustrations then of the research so far, and it is ongoing, as I said, so these are provisional, so don't take any of this as gospel, obviously. So with incompatible femininity, looking at a dominant form of femininity and how it's practiced, modesty is one of these kind of social codes, if you like. And you can see here from one participant how she talks about standing out. And there's plenty more examples of standing out in the research, but also of trying to cover up, of trying to divert attention from one's body, of trying to hide, of trying to get into the car, all of these different things that try and camouflage you essentially with another group. And can be seen in part as a practice of modesty or covering up one's body. I don't know, you just feel like everyone's watching you. And do you feel like that when you're walking? I don't really know, not really, not as much. Like, what makes being on a bicycle make you feel that everybody's looking at you and judging? Well, because like you're on a bike, so you stand out more. So this idea of standing out is seen as undesirable. And it is important to note as well that with the boys in the research, and also the girls, that the girls talking about their experiences with boys and interacting with teenage boys, often they wouldn't do it individually either. So that is worth pointing out. But this idea of standing out or not conforming with others was something that has come up again and again and again. And this fear of being exposed, whether that's one's skirt blowing up, or even when wearing trousers being exposed, something that isn't a concern for the boys who are involved so far, seems to be a major pattern and seems to be linked with not just in terms of standing out, but in other things in terms of covering up or not being in a very kind of public way of displaying yourself. Seems to be a major pattern emerging from the research so far, and seems to relate with a certain kind of articulation of a particular kind of femininity. So next, then you can see here a kind of intersection between beauty and care. So your hair is just everywhere over the helmet, like. So this particular participant obviously has long hair, and you can't really fix it in school, like not properly anyway. So you're kind of just walking around all day with your hair just like sticking up everywhere. So in this particular case, you can see, well, wearing the helmet, first of all, a lot of the boys referred to, and also the ones included in the focus groups, talked about like they may have the same expectations, for example, by parents to wear a helmet, but often it'll be attached to the side of their bike or not used at all. Whereas this particular teenage girl decided to wear a helmet, or maybe was asked to, or it was mandatory to wear a helmet. But you can see how the practice of care in the sense of wearing a helmet, and then a feminine standard of beauty to do with hair and it's sticking up and not being able to care for it, seems to conflict or be incompatible with the practice of cycling as it is in Ireland at the moment. So another one here, like I know, like we have the option to wear trousers as well, but like even just some people just don't feel comfortable wearing trousers, like to school. Like, I don't know how to explain, but it's more like ideal for us, like, or something. It just depends like what your opinion is on it, the skirts. So you can see here, this participant literally talks about an ideal form of dress as a girl. and how even if you have the option to wear trousers, which often features as a big part of the debate or public dialogue about how do we get girls more cycling, well, obviously let's make trousers an option. This complicates that because it shows that wearing trousers is seen in some ways to go against a particular feminine ideal to do with wearing skirts. And this is just one instance of a wider pattern that I found across a variety of focus groups where trousers are an option but are seen as masculine, so this won't be worn. Or it may even be subject to some kind of like teasing or bullying as a result of wearing trousers as a girl or being called a boy, etc. So just a bit more about incompatible femininity. So here you see a bit to do with physical restraint and a bit to do with the social practice of beauty. So you'll kind of be like sweaty and you'll be like not clean, and it will kind of like not ruin your day, but it will kind of be like you'd be wearing your high vis, your helmet. So in some ways enacting a very kind of careful type of cycling. You'd be wearing probably your raincoat and like you wouldn't be able to wear your skirt. It'd just be like ugly. You look kind of different, like strange. So you can see here that the degree of the degree of distress really and discomfort with wearing trousers because it's seen as ugly, but then also wearing all these other aspects that you might be expected to wear by your parent, for example. But in trying to be a good cyclist, it doesn't seem to fit with a particular articulation of femininity that you're expected to conform to. As well, the issue of sweat then was a big one that has come up again and again and seems to be something that's very taboo amongst girls, which is quite interesting because it's not seen as taboo at all amongst boys. And my interpretation of this so far in terms of the patterns I've coded is that there seems to be, as part of practicing this form of femininity, a need to practice physical restraint as a girl. Indeed, the skirt can be seen as a material or a technology that involves or actually actively makes people practice restraint. Like some girls talked about waddling like penguins, having to go up the stairs because their skirt was so tight. So it physically restrains in some respects, but also in some respects, it also makes people practice aspects of modesty because of the fear it may blow up. So this is just a particular observation, but things that have been brought up by participants as well. So here we can find, just to talk a little bit about cycling as masculine performance, we can find a useful contrast between the expectations of enacting femininity and those of masculinity, and how they actually can be seen to be very different expectations. So this is from one of the teenage girl participants talking about cycling to school with books. You'd come to school like sweaty, like it's a bit rank. You'd have to, and you can see that the sense of disgust here is palpable as it is in the other ones as well. You'd have your whole day in the uniform and then wear it the next day. It's kind of disgusting. Boys do that every day. Yeah, and just so you know, that's a different participant responding there. Yeah, but like they're fit, like they wouldn't sweat. I don't know. You do realize you're allowed to sweat, right? So this is another teenage girl participant who's actually challenging this narrative that girls can't sweat. But the fact that she points out that you're allowed to sweat shows how you're not really allowed to sweat as a girl. Interestingly, I think. Yeah, like I didn't say you couldn't sweat. I just think it's a bit disgusting to wear your uniform after, I guess. And what do the boys do then? I just don't think they sweat. They stink. So this is the other participant once again. And what do you think about sweating for boys? It's nothing for them. So you can see there's totally different standards applied to boys. That it's nothing for boys. It's just being a boy is sweating. It's fine. Exerting yourself, physically using your body, like engaging in things that may be forceful or even involving risk taking, just appears to not be. And that's not just from this incident, but from various others as well in the research. Doesn't seem to be a problem. It actually seems to be something that could even be celebrated as something as being part of being masculine. Part of being a boy is sweating, is getting rough and tumbling, that kind of thing. Whereas for a girl, then it seems that to sweat is something that's highly taboo. It's something that's seen as unladylike potentially, or just, yeah, I suppose I can let the participants speak in the next one here. So I think it's a masculine thing. Why? Stereotypes, I suppose. It looks cool on boys. Sometimes older people tell me, oh, that's not ladylike. And that kind of puts it into your head, like, I have to act like a lady. And then you get put into those stereotypes automatically. And then it gets hard to get out of it and do things that you're not stereotyped to do. So once again, you can see how, to some extent, how you act as a teenage girl is heavily regulated and policed to some extent, and how this leads to, in part, things like cycling, which just do not enable, at least in its current formulation in Ireland, the practice of a particular kind of femininity to happen, and means that it stays and maintains as a boys thing, essentially. So just to finish with a final quote then, and this has to do with cycling as masculine performance and is once again one of the teenage girls involved. And I think it's interesting because it points to, I guess, the changes that may take place between primary and secondary, where it seems like there's an even bigger drop off. I feel like it's just like a certain stuff gets like pushed towards certain genders when you get to a certain age. Like, so like that was like more so pushed towards the fellas, but like certain other stuff that's considered more feminine is pushed toward the females. So that's something like everyone did in primary, but the minute you get to this age, that's more of a fella's thing. But that's just literally society. Same with like you wouldn't really see a fella there doing his hair in the morning, doing his makeup every morning. There's people who do that, but like that is something more that was pushed toward like girls, or like certain other stuff like sports and stuff were pushed more towards fellas. So you can see literally these social codes to do with beauty, to do with restraint, and then to do with exertion and maybe also bravado with boys, seem to kind of intensify at that time of adolescence when people start to move into second level. So just a little bit, I'm not going to make any conclusions about that because that's just literally giving you a bit of a sample of where the analysis is at the moment. So there is nothing to be taken, but it's just something that's thought-provoking for the moment. And there will be a report published quite soon, probably in the next few months. So that will be where you'd find the kind of final statements and I suppose a lot of the empirical support for those theoretical claims. But another thing that's developed recently is the Anti-Cyclist Ambassador campaign, which is in part informed by the research. So the aim of this campaign is to take action to enable and empower teenage girls to cycle to school. And the objectives of it then, informed in part by the research, is to develop role models and leaders for school cycling amongst teenage girls, empower teenage girls to shape the cycle-friendliness of their institutions. And that includes cycle-friendliness in the sense of allowing people to maintain a certain form of femininity as well, if they want to continue with that, I suppose. And then lastly, then provide opportunities for teenage girls to cycle as well. Just literally get the practice of cycling, which challenges it as a boys thing. So just a little bit of contact details there. So that's the Green Schools email, my own. If you have any questions, feel free to email me anytime. The Anti-Cyclist Ambassador has set up their own Instagram, so you can check that out. They're the ones leading that essentially. It's called She Can Cycle. And then you can, the Green Schools Twitter then is Green Schools Ireland. So I'll finish with that. That's okay.
Nice. Well done, Robbie. I had some technical difficulties with my video, so I'm going to try playing that now because I think it might be useful for you guys. So sorry about that. So I'll just do a tester to see if you can hear it.
So now I know this all might look a little bit intimidating.
I used to cycle a lot in first year when I first.
Okay, we'll try again. Okay. I will tick the right boxes this time. Right.
Fear of being judged by people. Loads of the lads cycle to school.
They just see girls as like dresses and skirts and makeup, and like boys as like, oh, bikes.
Okay.
Hi, Robin.
Hi, how are you?
Good. Lovely to meet you.
You too.
So now I know this all might look a little bit intimidating.
I used to cycle a lot in first year when I first started. I was so self-conscious about it.
I felt like everything was like stopping me from cycling to school.
Fear of being judged. Fear of being judged by people. Loads of the lads cycle to school.
They just see girls as like dresses and skirts and makeup, and like boys as like, oh, bikes and like athletic stuff.
Peer pressure is literally everything.
This sounds really stupid, but I really do think the helmet is such a big part of it. If you see a lad on a bike, it's not really different. You just think of it as, yeah. But like if you see a girl on a bike in her uniform or something, it's different.
I feel like you just need one person to do it.
There's something better than just like cycling and just seeing like the canal for me, like the whole like stretch along.
Instead of a 30-minute walk, it was like a 5-minute cycle.
I've completely got back into it. The way you can push yourself and then after you just feel so great.
Like I don't like the fact that other girls would be like, oh, I would never get on a bike because of what they think, when like they won't ever get to experience like how it actually feels and stuff like that.
You're sweaty and you look awful, but like you just feel good about yourself.
Yesterday when I went for a cycle, I saw two of my old friends like on the road, and they're two boys, and like I saw them being like like, what's she doing on a bike? I didn't care. Like, I gave them a big smile and waved.
Oh, people are gonna look at me. Like, people are gonna see me. I'm like, yeah.
You're your own person, you do you.
I think you build up this mental state of like, oh God, oh no, this lack of confidence in yourself that's probably associated with other things, and you're like, hold on, it's a bike.
Okay. I'll pass it over to you, Tamzin.
That's great. Thank you so much, Caitríona and Robbie. Those were really, really interesting presentations, and I really appreciate you coming in and doing those for us. We've had a really great turnout today, and if you'd like to keep submitting questions to the bottom of the screen, we're just going to do a quick section where we're going to talk a little bit about the campaign in Scotland, because I think everyone would like to know a little bit more about that. So would you be able to just, I have a question for you, if that's okay, actually, I'm going to jump in and just say, in terms of starting the campaign in Scotland, is there anything you're planning to do differently to the way that you approached it in Ireland? Like, is there any lessons that you learned from the way that you approached developing the campaign in Ireland that you're going to carry over to Scotland?
Thanks, Tamzin. Yeah, so basically in Scotland at the moment, it's the very early stages. So Sustrans are speaking. Can you hear me all right, Tamzin? Yeah.
Yes,
yeah, so Sustrans Scotland are speaking to teenage girls about the barriers. So it's at the very early stages. Obviously that data needs to be analysed before we know what that campaign would even look like, because, you know, it is the teenage girls that shape the campaign. So that's kind of the I suppose, stage we're at now at the moment with the Sustrans campaign in Scotland. But so far, you know, just from chatting from the focus groups that have been carried out, some of the barriers are very similar to Ireland. So yeah, we'll have to start, I suppose, over here, and we'll try and link the two campaigns and share the branding as well, so that we can share learnings from both Ireland and then Scotland as well.
No, that sounds really amazing, and I'm so excited for the launch of the campaign in Scotland, because I think it's definitely something that we need. And yeah, as Robbie's shown, you know, there's a lot of scientific evidence that backs that up. That actually covers my next question, which was, will you be repeating exactly the same process as like creating the focus groups, or yeah? Well, I don't need to say it, or will the issues be similar? And I think you've covered that in terms of saying, you know, you're going to do the focus groups again, but are you expecting the barriers to come up to be quite similar to those that they've
so they need to be, Sustrans Scotland they've done a wide catchment of focus groups nationally around Scotland. So all that data needs to be analysed, and it's still taking place, the focus groups at the moment. So the issues that have come up in Ireland have come up in Scotland as well, but the data will need to be analysed to make sure that we've covered all options and all barriers for the campaign as well.
No, that makes perfect sense. I had another question actually, because we have had a few comments prior to this session about the barriers that people that are maybe slightly older than the age group you're working with experience. Are you going to be working with any groups or organizations to kind of take your learnings from this campaign and pass them over, or are you working with any to kind of work backwards? So are you working with like a campaign that works with women in general and then using some of the learnings from that, or are you treating these as two sort of separate groups, so young women and then older women, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Robbie, do you want to jump in on that one to see what's going on in Ireland at the moment? Are you working with anyone else or sharing research?
Yeah, so so literally just focusing on the gender gap right now in second level, and trying to do like I think it would be interesting at the end of the, like, I'm planning incorporating this into the research report when it's finished, is there is a lot of research in the area of mobilities, that kind of, which is like a field that incorporates the social sciences and transport studies to some extent. But there is a good bit of research there looking at what's described as a life course perspective, you know, not just focusing on particular cross sections of people's lives, but actually thinking of what's it like, and if these kinds of, I suppose, if these kinds of attributes are socialized into particularly boys and girls in second level, well then why wouldn't it have an effect when you're an adult woman and an adult man, you know? And obviously people who are otherwise gendered as well, who, you know, don't identify as a man or a woman. So yeah, so I think we are not going to be doing anything with that as such yet. We may, in the ambassador program, I think part of the plan would be like other ambassador programs. So there's a climate ambassador program in Ireland too that incorporates people of all ages as well. So that could be, and it's important to have something to aim for as well for those particular teenage girls. You know, role models, absolutely. So building role models doesn't just mean, you know, maybe people in university, or, you know, people in workplaces now, or women who cycle with their families. You know, all those particular people could be ambassadors in the future. So I think that's probably how we'll connect it, and hopefully it will be part of a wider debate in Ireland about the gender gap in cycling, you know, beyond in adolescence, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think it's worth mentioning the hashtag, the anti-cycles hashtag, has kind of taken off since the campaign launched, and that's still going on Twitter and Instagram, isn't it, Robbie? It's doing really well, and that's people of all ages. So I suppose it's kind of given people a platform to talk about the issues regardless of age, online anyway.
No, that makes perfect sense, and thank you for covering that. That was really interesting. Yeah, as a woman myself, obviously, I feel like, you know, I've almost gone through some of that, and so yeah, I completely understand. Okay, I'm going to stop hogging the question box, and I'm going to read out some of the questions from our viewers. So first one is from Lisa, and she's asked, how can we address the issue of teenage boys harassing girls on bikes?
So the big question. Robbie, do you want to talk about the plans, or how we're going to speak to teenage boys eventually, or whether it's a different organization? Or
yeah, I guess like we might adopt different approaches potentially. Like, and there's so many different ways you could go about it. It all depends on I guess, like, there's so many different ways you can interpret it as well. So but it's about doing something, really, isn't it? Acknowledging it at the beginning as an issue, that there is an issue of harassment, there is an issue that people are essentially bullied off cycling, you know. And it's I didn't even know about that, Caitríona, about that particular participant in the photo shoot, that she stopped cycling. But that just shows you, I mean, it's so powerful to get an actual particular story of someone who, you know, would have already been someone who's braving it already, and then has actually been bullied off of her bike, which is very sad to hear. But that's part of it, isn't it? So I guess, yeah, in terms of what to do about it, I guess our plan to some extent is, with this research report, to hopefully influence policy. So have some aspects of, I guess, top-down interventions that can address things at a structural level, really, because I think there is structural problems here, and there's problems that, as I suppose me and Caitríona were talking the other day, and in some respects, this issue can be seen as an issue of gender relations at large in society. And cycling and harassment while cycling is just an effect or a symptom of those problematic relations, you know. So I think there needs to be intersectoral action that addresses it, that goes beyond cycling, but obviously incorporates cycling. Yeah, I don't know what that will be yet, because we haven't formulated we have to finish the research, we have to finish the analysis, and then when we have a really good diagnosis of the problem, then we can start to say, well, this could be changed, this could be changed, this could be tried. But I think intuitively, a lot of what we've been doing has been hitting the bullseye from the beginning, you know. I think the photo shoot, those images, how many times have those images been used now, not just in Ireland, but internationally, because they provide such powerful images of what it can look like to be a teenage girl cyclist, because that's so weird, you know what I mean? It's just something that's not seen, and it's not even imaginable for some people, but now it is, you know. And it's done in such a way that's not shameful, it's done in a way that's prideful, you know. So I think changing the images and the representation of what a cyclist is really important, and that's already being done. And then the ambassadors then hopefully will lead change in that respect, you know. And will come up with their own interventions for what they think will happen, you know. So I think that giving voice, changing the images, and will serve the function of normalizing it, and hopefully breaking down those gender expectations and make them more flexible and more fluid, I would say. And there is schools in Ireland as well that seem to not have a massive gender gap. I think you know, that's very, very interesting, because the school right beside them could have a massive gender gap and then the other one doesn't. So what's going on there, you know? And we haven't had a chance to fully explore that, but that indicates that this is a cultural problem, you know. So and maybe it has, at least with the research so far, it indicates that there are certain, we need to create more gender fluidity or flexibility in the way schools are run potentially, and in the way that what kind of expectations and people have, depending on like literally on what, how they're classified in terms of sex, I guess. But
yeah, I totally agree with what you've said, Robbie, and just about the image, those powerful images of girls on bike, that idea and that kind of the need to see girls on bikes in the media, that came from teenagers. You know, I remember speaking to teenage boys and girls at this kind of seminar event, and there was a drop-in session and we were just chatting to teenagers, and it came from guys as well. Like, you don't see images of teenage girls or women on bikes in the media, in society. You know, it's not part of our culture. So it's about changing that image, and all of like the solutions to all of these issues, you know, have come from teenage girls. And I think Robbie's spot on about this kind of, you know, intersectional approach to address the street harassment. It has to be across the board. It has to be a cultural shift. And slowly, you know, we can change the image in people's minds and the perceptions of what a cyclist looks like, but that will take time. So we also, you know, in tandem, we need to address street harassment as an issue. And in Ireland, I spoke to the National Women's Council over there, and at the moment, it's the same for most European cities. There's no body in charge of, you know, particular one organization in charge of street harassment. So it fits in that gap in between, you know, home and domestic abuse or harassment that takes place in the workplace. So legislation, first of all, needs to happen. Like Robbie was saying, there needs to be policy put in place, and it needs to be, you know, an intersectional approach across industries. So I think that's like the first step, and then you know, that campaign of, we need to make that the behavior that's uncool, you know, shouting at people on the street, that's just not acceptable. That's what we have to spread. That's the culture.
No, absolutely. No, that was, I feel like that was a very succinct answer to what was a very complex question, as you've just brought up. So thank you for that. And I feel like actually there's something that just popped into my mind. In case anyone's watching, there will be a short bit in one of our future talks about street harassment and infrastructure. So I think that could be a really good time for anyone who wants to learn a little bit more about that. But I'm just going to quickly move on to our next question, which is from Emily, and it is, how do you help teenage girls overcome the idea that wearing a helmet isn't cool?
So Robbie, you've probably had discussions about this issue, and it came up from the beginning, when we were just kind of had the first few focus groups. I suppose even in the video it comes up, and I remember we weren't sure whether we should leave. So there was 21 girls took part in that video who we shot in one day, and the creative agency tied that story together with using 6 of them. And we weren't sure actually whether we should leave that helmet bit in. And we spoke to teenage girls, and they said, yeah, that is an issue. And it came up, I don't know if anyone who's watching the talk, we can share links to, it's on the homepage for Anchi Cycles. There was a talk that took place at the launch, and it comes up again there. And I think it's about conversations and about sharing your insecurities about it, and maybe why. Like for me, I have to say it is annoying. I have curly hair, and if I always wear a helmet, but it just, I have to shake it out and I have to do different things to it. But it affects guys as well, you know, if you have big hair. So maybe we need helmets for big hair. But I think, yeah, it's about talking about your insecurities about wearing it, and kind of, I think if everyone starts to wear them, it becomes normalized, you know, and you take your helmet off and you just fix your hair and you get on with your day. Or it's not even, it mightn't be about hair for some people. It just, they don't like the look of them. I just happen to like my helmet because it's a nice one, you know. I got a nice design that I like. So I did talk to teenage girls about that, and they were asking like, where do you get it? You know, so it's about kind of sharing the knowledge, because there's a lot of equipment out there, you know, for men, or a cyclist looks a certain way, whether they wear high vis or whatever, they have a type of brand of helmet. So maybe it's about sharing. Oh, I use this. I think it's called Chic, actually, the helmet brand I have anyway. So yeah, it's just, that's the online website, actually. It's the Chic, I think it's called Chic Cycling or something. So yeah, it's just about, and that's not a plug, it's just about women talking about what they like and making it, taking ownership of how they look when they cycle.
Absolutely, making sure that people know that there are other possibilities to horrible grey oversized helmets.
Yeah.
I think that's so important. And knowledge sharing
exactly.
as well. I think, particularly between women and people like that, I think that's so important. And I've recently been engaged in conversations for people who, as you said, have curly hair or big hair, and knowledge sharing in that area is so important. Sorry, we're just gonna have to move on a little bit because we've just had some questions come in. Emily another Emily, just to clarify, do you know of any other schools or organizations doing similar campaigns that you can learn from?
Hi, so that's actually Emily, my manager. Hello, Emily. So do we know, as far as I know, like a similar campaign, I think she means, is it a similar campaign? What was it? Do you know of any other schools doing similar campaigns? Not in cycling. I think that's why we ended up developing the campaign, because it started off with myself working in secondary schools in Dublin, which Robbie is doing now, but there was no real no one spoke their language. No one spoke the teenagers' language. So there was a lack of connection there between cycling and what was engagement, whether it was education programs or anything else. So I think that was why we needed to develop the campaign for teenage girls anyway. Is there anything at home, Robbie, in Ireland that's
not that I can think of as such, but I guess it could be why, you could describe at the moment that, or in the last few years, there's been a fourth wave of feminism, and it could be seen as part of that wave, I think to some extent, in the fact that it does really speak to the fact that it resonates so much with people, first of all, and second of all, the fact that there are many initiatives that aren't to do with cycling, but also within the cycling world as well, that seem to be linked with this, but aren't working in the space of schools and teenage girls. I think that it can be seen as read to them more generally. And once again, taking that intersectoral approach, it doesn't mean it can link with them as well, I think.
No, absolutely. Sorry, we've got a few more questions. This one's huge. So I feel like we're probably not going to get all the way through it, but if you could just try and be, succinct if possible. Is there any research being done into the attitudes of parents to cycling in relation to gender? And I know this is something Caitríona has covered in a panel discussion before, but I think it would be great if you could just come up with a quick summary of if possible.
So sorry, what was the question about parents and cycling?
Is there any research being done into the attitudes of parents to cycling in relation to gender?
Yeah, I think there should be. I don't know of any. Robbie, would you know off the top of your head?
Yeah, well, like in the focus groups for the teenage girls, that's been brought up, but it's a problem of capacity. You need. I think the way to test that wouldn't. So as far as I understand from the focus group so far, with both boys and girls are subject to permissions in terms of wearing a helmet or if they're allowed to cycle or not. And the question isn't like both of them are subject to that. So some boys won't be allowed to cycle. Some boys will have to cycle. Will have the mandatory helmet use. And then plenty of girls will. It's a question of what's the quantitative difference. So really, it would be a survey research style thing, I would think, as opposed to a qualitative exploration like this. So we would need to find, to say it's gendered, you would need to compare the parents of boys with the parents of girls and find out, is there a difference? Because I know it happens to all, basically, from what I've gathered so far.
Yeah, and just a quick note on I think that's what you're referring to, Tamzin. So there was a research study carried out with pregnant mothers and their babies, and they were asked to kind of assess the activity of the baby while it was in the womb. And it was found that women who knew they were having boys said that the baby was more active than when the women knew that they were having girls, just because they were aware of the gender. And the control, so women who didn't know the gender of the baby was in the middle. So basically those norms or those permissions, as Robbie was saying, are put on us at a very early age, before we're even born. what boys can do are they're more active, or they're more energetic or boisterous, and girls are quietly sitting in a corner, that type of thing. And it's the same for parents. It's come up in a lot of focus groups, and I have a twin brother, so I'm well aware of it as well, that a woman actually came up to me on the street in Dublin to say, "Oh my God, you're mad cycling, you might fall off or you might get hurt." And I was like, well, I'm made of the same stuff as my brother, so it doesn't, if we're going to get hurt. And actually women are shown to be less risk taking, or they engage in less risk taking behavior, so I might be a safer cyclist than my twin brother. So it's this whole societal kind of image of a girl that she needs to be wrapped up in cotton wool, and that's something that does need to change as well. But like Robbie said, it's capacity.
Yeah, no,
but it's already. Oh, sorry, Tamzin.
You finish.
It's already irrespective of parents. It's already in this research, about what are the particular kind of social expectations or practices that are associated with being a girl versus being a boy. And like the ones I said, modesty, which once again it is a form of restraint. Then as well, looking at care for oneself and others versus indifference from boys, which you could just put as to some extent risk aversion versus risk taking. And then there was a few others there. Physical restraint versus exertion. That's literally been coded into it, and there's some good data to support that. So you don't even need to ask parents to know that's a part of what the feminine expectations of being a girl, I guess. Mm-hmm. And it always has to be contrasted with what is expected of being a masculine boy as well, I guess.
Thank you. That was a great summary. I gave you an impossible task and you stepped up. So I am aware that we have gone slightly over time, but if you have 5 more minutes, we have one more question. It would be really great to just get that out of the way. And just a reminder for everyone who's attending today, the session will be recorded. So if you do miss out on this because you've got other commitments, feel free to catch it later on YouTube. So the final question is from Laurie, and she's asked, what should schools be doing to help? And I think this is a really nice one to finish on, because I think, a lot of people who've come here today, they might be saying, how can I move forward with this information that you've given me? So if anyone here is involved in a school or a college or a university, what can they do going forwards from this presentation?
I suppose, Robbie, do you want to give the example of what's happening in Ireland and how schools are helping you guys?
Yeah, so I guess sign up for whatever campaigns emerge. I suppose if you're in the UK with Sustrans, and then in Ireland it's just we have the ambassador program. So there's going to be applications for that going out in I think September or October, maybe even earlier than that this year. So sign up for our campaigns. Secondly, I would say is acknowledge that the gender gap is a problem, that something should be done about. Because I think that's kind of the starting point. If we're all on the same page, that there is an issue there, and that's worth addressing. That does disadvantage young women throughout their lives. Then, and then I would say another thing is, at least with Sustrans at the moment, you're trying to do focus groups. So sign up for the focus groups, get involved with the campaign, acknowledge the issue, and then maybe as well provide a platform and voice and listen to the teenage girls in your schools and see what you can do to help, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Support them in signing up for the focus groups, and make, if that involves giving them class time, and just showing that it's an important issue.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. I have so many more questions for you, but I think we are going to have to finish this session here. Thank you so much, everyone who's come to this session. Robbie and Caitríona, you are more than welcome to leave, or you can stay just while I close the session. Thank you very much to our wonderful speakers. Thank you for going first as well. I think that was an amazing session to kickstart this week, and I'm super excited to see what